Aloha! We're here in Honolulu, Hawaii for the Plant Biology 17 Annual Conference. I'm your host, Rishi Masalia, and we're Between the Palms. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Between the Palms. Today I am joined by Tyrone Spady. So Tyrone, can you describe what you do at ASPB?
Sure. As ASPB's Director of Legislative and Public Affairs, I manage our engagement with Congress and other policymakers in Washington, D.C., and really try to serve as a translator and an interface between our membership and those policymakers in general.
Okay, perfect. So this is a question I think we've been getting a lot lately as scientists in the last couple of months is why is science policy so critically important? And why should scientists be participating?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
First of all, these decisions with regard to funding, with regard to how we allow scientists from other countries to interact and participate in the U.S. scientific enterprise, intellectual property issues, all of these government decisions are made typically by people who sometimes don't have a scientific background, who don't have extensive experience. The average congressional staffer has to work on a suite of issues, and we all know that most of us are overextended in our jobs. They experience the same thing on a heightened level. So they really rely on experts to alert them to issues that are sort of emerging in the community, also issues in terms of the impacts of proposed legislation and maybe regulations that are being proposed by government. So it's really important for people who have the expertise to engage in that process so that the folks who are making those decisions are understanding and aware of how it all will impact.
Right. So you're talking about engagement. What do you actually mean by engagement? What can people actually do? What do you do when you engage congressional staffers or the legislative body?
Sure. So the engagement can happen in a variety of ways. At the agency level, for example, USDA might put out a rule relating to how, so for example, I'll think of one thing that came up in the last Farm Bill was the institution of a matching requirement for if you weren't a researcher at a land-grant institution or you hadn't gotten a designation sort of for a waiver, that would have required folks at, for example, private research foundations such as the Boyce-Thompson Institute to come in with matching dollars to be able to get USDA funding. That's the sort of thing where it's really important for people who have experiences in the foundational space to be able to communicate with policymakers to let them know, no, there's critical interactions between researchers at our land-grant institutions and private foundations. There's synergies there, so we need to be able to talk to them about that. And I think that really is sort of what we're getting at. Funding is probably the easiest one to think of. So within the context of funding, each year there's an appropriations process whereby Congress sets the spending priorities for the National Science Foundation, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy.
I think this is a big one because the budget just came out a few months ago, right?
The President's budget proposal.
Proposed budget.
Not the budget, which is an important distinction.
Proposed budget just came out. And so a lot of people in our community are talking about it and how it relates to science funding.
Right, so I think that's great that you brought up the President's budget proposal. He called for the elimination of ARPA-E. He called for reductions in funding at the National Science Foundation and the Department of Energy's Office of Science. So when those recommendations come from the White House, it's important for Congress to understand, okay, what does this actually mean? What does the elimination of ARPA-E actually mean in terms of developing better renewable energy resources, et cetera. So there was an enormous outpouring from the community, both in terms of individual scientists contacting their members of Congress and letting them know how important those programs were in the districts. The other thing that happens sort of more behind the scenes, and we probably don't highlight it nearly enough, but at the staff level, both in terms of myself and ASPB has a government relations contract with a firm called Lewis Burke Associates. We went to the Hill and talked to committee staff to make sure that they understood that this was right, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So those are some of the different levels. We can engage by supporting activities at the society level. Folks can engage individually via Twitter, calling.
Yeah. I've heard, and so from in Athens, Georgia, where I live, I've always heard that calling your representatives is way better than like emailing them or.
It varies.
It varies?
It varies.
Okay. Why does it vary, and how does it vary?
I think it depends on the nature of the issue that you're talking about. If there's a lot of complexity, if it's not just as simple as a vote yes, vote no, if there's more nuanced discussion that needs to happen, for example, if you need to describe your work, then I think sometimes a written conversation where there's sort of a record that someone could return to, maybe because the depth of information is a little more than someone could take in
in a single phone call. Yeah.
Right. But that might be a time when you might think about communicating either electronically by email or in writing by a traditional letter. Okay. In contrast, Twitter, you have very little space, right? You have 140 characters, but you have, it's a much more public platform. So if I tweet at you as an elected representative, other constituents can see that. The press can see it. Right. So Twitter can be a very effective tool in that regard.
Right. And because everybody can be a part of that conversation.
Everybody can be a part of the conversation, absolutely. But I mean, we just want people to reach out, period. At this point, I think the modality
is engage at any level at this point, right?
Whatever way you feel comfortable is great.
Okay. Yeah. So in April, we just had the March for Science across the United States and around parts of the world. How do we take that momentum that we built in the March for Science and carry it forward into actionable actions?
Sure.
Into actions.
First, I think the March for Science was great in that it tapped into both within the scientific community and outside a groundswell of energy and engagement that in my professional career I've never seen. So that's phenomenal.
Right.
ASPB and other organizations typically will send out what we call action alerts several times a year. We often do them specifically focused on the annual appropriation cycle, so at key points. So for example, maybe after a committee of jurisdiction announces what the funding level is going to be for NSF, for example, we might encourage our members to reach out.
Right. So it's kind of saying, like, this is what Congress is saying, this is, engage.
Right. Right. So unfortunately, traditionally we have an issue where people are responsive, we get maybe 10% of folks that receive our messages that will actually follow through and engage their elected representatives. So what I would hope will come out of the March for Science initiative is that a more robust participation in the activities of the society. One of the things that we also do is we bring folks to Washington, D.C. for a variety of sort of broader community efforts. We do these we do these for climate change. We do these specifically for the National Science Foundation. ASPB also led an effort to organize a congressional exhibition of ag research last year for the first time. And so we bring people to do those. We bring ASPB scientists to do things like that as well. So we're always sort of looking for people who are interested, ways to facilitate engagement, but we're also looking for people who are willing, are both willing and have an aptitude to do these kinds of engagement activities. And so we're always looking for new people because we obviously can't rely on the same individuals each time. So that's another important opportunity for folks to sort of make a contribution. And they can easily do so by reaching out to myself or members of the Science Policy Committee to let them know that they're interested. And I was going to mention two more things that
Yeah,
we're
of
doing.
course.
One in the context of this meeting is where we have an ongoing Twitter campaign where
Yep.
we're trying to encourage folks to tweet at their members of Congress. If you don't have a Twitter account, we're helping to get folks set up and also to...
Science Twitter is a thing. If you don't have a science Twitter, you should get a science Twitter.
I support that very much. And we're giving people... Oh, I don't have
You
a
gotta
badge.
put the badge down, yeah.
Yeah, but so that's sort of an easy thing. And even though we're doing it at the meeting, that's certainly something that could happen.
Carry forward.
Yeah, and August is a really important time in terms of congressional advocacy because that is what we call the August recess. And that's when all members of Congress are, it's not quite a vacation, but they're not in Washington, D.C.
Right, they come back
home.
to their constituencies, yeah.
Exactly. And they normally do a large number of community outreach activities. So they'll have town halls, they'll show up at your local grocery store. They do all these types of things to hear from their constituents. And having plant scientists at these events, particularly if you can have multiple people, is a really powerful way for the actual representatives to hear from the scientists and to know that this is something in the district that people care about.
Right. So in August 2017, look for your representatives in the constituency and go and talk to them. Talk to them about plant science, engage with them.
And we'll be providing additional resources to help folks identify who their elected representatives are, as well as some suggested messaging on things that they might want to talk about.
Good.
And we even have on our website sort of materials that crib sheets, form letters for following up with elected representatives and their staff after you've had these kinds of
Good, so people don't have to reinvent the wheel
you don't
when
have
they
to
go
reinvent
and
the
talk
wheel.
to their representatives.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
And if you're an early career person and you're interested in doing more in the science policy space, ASPB is very unique in that we have an early career representative as part of the Science Policy Committee.
What is the definition of early career? Is it graduate student?
Graduate students and postdocs.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, graduate students and postdocs. We have an application process. In previous years, we've requested a statement of interest as well as a CV. And then the committee evaluates and selects the candidate who shows demonstrated aptitude and also, if they are perhaps from a geographically important area, that's something that can be taken into consideration as well. But that's a great opportunity for an early career person to get more involved in advocacy, to engage with the other members of the Science Policy Committee and the society leadership as a peer. So they have all the same, they can speak up and contribute the same vote as everybody else on the committee.
So their voice will be heard.
Their voice will be heard, absolutely. And we bring them to Capitol Hill to do congressional visits each year.
So that's like real, like on the job, like that's real Hill experience. Perfect. I think that'll do it for this episode of Between the Palms. Tyrone, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For taking the time.
Okay.
And we'll see you next time.